Hello, Ridgefield Playhouse. I'm Cheryl Washington, host of Reel to Reel, where we spotlight real life on film. And today, in honor of National Hispanic Heritage Month, we're going into the story of In the Heights. We're going to dig deep and go beyond the story of it because this is a good one. I'm telling you, what a winner. We've got two fantastic speakers who are going to be addressing this subject with me today. I'm going to first introduce you to Rob Snyder. He is the author of Crossing Broadway, Washington Heights, and The Promise of New York City. He is also a Manhattan Borough historian and professor emeritus of journalism and American studies at Rutgers College. I did not have him as a professor, so there's no nepotism here. And also, Raul Reyes is an attorney and contributing editor to NBC Latino and CNN Opinion. And we're so happy to have you join us for our diversity film series, both of you. This is just such a joy, such a delight, and what a grand way to start the month. Thank you for coming and thank you for sharing your experiences. So can we just talk a little bit about it? Because our audience has just seen it. And so they're very anxious to find out what you experts have to say. And I want to get your impressions first. I don't know if you saw it a long time ago, or if you're able to join us this evening in seeing it again, but let's just get your individual reactions to it and your impressions, if you don't mind. I'll start with you, Rob.
I loved it as a play. I loved it as a film because it took a contemporary story about Latinos in northern Manhattan and told it in a neighborhood that had a long history as an immigrant neighborhood. And it told it by drawing on some of the best Broadway musicals of the past. So it was at once very particular about particular groups in particular places, but also universal in very constructive ways.
Yeah, I think it has a grand appeal to everyone. It really is. It's not just dissected in one kind of specific demographic, if you will. It really does appeal to so many. And I'm going to bring this to you, Raul, if you don't mind. I'm going to have you give us some kind of impression that you have had, either from the play or the movie or both.
Well, I loved both versions. And for me, this movie, just being my family is Mexican American background, but I think this movie and others like it have so much resonance for Latinos. Now I'll ask people in your audience to just think real quick the last time they saw, like, say, a movie starring a Latino person with a big star who's Latino in a movie. And unless they're thinking about Jennifer Lopez, I'm guessing that probably people really can't think of anyone. And that's because Latinos are not in movies a whole heck of a lot. And when you do see Latinos in movies, we're always portrayed in crisis, where the characters are fleeing across the border or running from the drug cartels. So for me, In the Heights was so beautiful and so joyous because it was everyday people and their struggles and their joys and their dreams, just like everybody else. And of course, it's a musical. It's sort of a fantasy.
And good choreography on top of that.
Yeah, but so it's not exactly reality in that way. But I think this is the kind of movie that no matter what your background, no matter who you are, you can see yourself in this film. But that really rings true, I believe, for Latinos.
I think you're right. It's interesting because Lin Manuel Miranda had called it a love letter to his community. And he really did, to me, punctuate the spirit of what it really does feel like to be of Latin descent. And I'm sorry that I'm a Black woman, and so I get it. I mean, there are a lot of nuances that are quite similar, obviously. And so when I was looking at it, I could see a lot of parallels to my own community. And so I think for the fact that the audience is taking a look at this, I think it resonates with everyone. I think it does something for everyone. You don't have to be a part of the barrio, for example, be a part of Harlem. It really does capture the imagination and the attention of us all.
Yeah, and it captures people, I think, imagination, because look at some of the themes in this movie. They're so universal, worrying about paying the rent, worrying about, going off to college, assimilation, gentrification. Those are issues that no matter where you live or what your background, we all live with those issues. That's 21st century America. So for me, that part of it was as well very, very universal and just presented in such a joyous way.
I agree. And, also, it does capture that essence of home. And I think that that had such a great spirit, did it not, Rob? I mean, you spent a lot of time when you did some research on your book in Washington Heights. I even read that you had done some patrolling with police
Oh,
officers.
yeah,
So
yeah.
share that with us if you don't mind. I want to know a little bit more about what you were able to see and witness on your own.
Well, one thing is that Washington Heights has long been a neighborhood of immigrants. It became the neighborhood we know today in the 1920s because subway construction set off a real estate boom in northern Manhattan. And older generations of immigrants, primarily Irish and Jewish, also some Greeks, rode the subway up to northern Manhattan, where they found then brand new apartments and they settled in. By the time In the Heights is set in Washington Heights, those groups were really starting to vanish from upper Manhattan. You see some glimpses of them, right? In the taxi company and who owns it, Shanahan's in one version. But they were leaving by the time In the Heights was made. And that universality that you talk about is grounded in the fact that In the Heights was deeply shaped by Fiddler on the Roof, which is also a musical about a search for home that appeals to people of all sorts of backgrounds. To me, one of the exciting things about In the Heights is that's about a neighborhood that had a reputation as the crack and murder capital of New York City. And that
For
was
years.
for years. And it was unfair to the entire community. It was grounded in a small part of the neighborhood and a small percentage of people there, but it tarred everybody who lived there. And the musical, when it came out, was not treated as a false depiction of the neighborhood, but as an honest depiction of the neighborhood. And it recognized the experiences of the majority of the people there. And I thought that was great.
I thought it was very joyous. I mean, it really did
Mhm.
show this joyful spirit. I think that everyone felt some kind of sense of humanity, if you will,
Mhm.
in watching this, and because all of the characters that you would see had some semblance of spirit and had some semblance of what we all go through. Like you mentioned the different themes. I do agree with you, Raul, when you said that. And gentrification is a big deal. Rob, I know that you know that because you've seen the real manifestation, if you will, and the evolution of what's taken place in Washington Heights. So let me ask this: did they get it wrong in any aspects of this movie in terms of those areas?
There were some people who said online that there should have been more Afro-Latino characters, right? That was a criticism that was lodged, but it got more
Colorism.
right than wrong. And I'll say
Mhm.
this in two ways. In the opening overture to the film, in that opening segment, when you
Mhm.
hear the theme song, what do you see in the morning? Everybody gets up and goes to work. This
Mhm.
is a neighborhood where people worked often 2 and 3 jobs to make it in America and to support a family in the Dominican Republic. The second thing is if you think about the film, just like in Fiddler on the Roof, this is a world where women are turning the world upside down. It's
Wow.
women whose desires to make a career, build a family, get out of the neighborhood are really disrupting traditional patterns. And I think both ways it gets a lot right about northern Manhattan.
That's a good point.
I felt like it got a lot right about the neighborhood, and I remember when this movie came out that some people felt there were some charges of colorism, meaning that the movie tended although it had Afro-Latino
Mhm.
cast members and dancers, that the leads and the main storylines primarily focused on lighter skinned Latinos, and I think that's say a valid criticism. And for me, what I liked about it, well, number one, Lin-Manuel Miranda, the creator, he actually apologized for that, and
Yeah,
he
he
said
did.
he welcomed the dialogue. And I felt that it was good that to even have that discussion, because in the U.S. we think of racial relations usually literally in a black-white type of framework, and so I think just having that discussion and the criticism makes people realize, like, oh yeah, Latino people as well have discrimination, say if they're Afro-Latino, or colorism, or experience a type of internal racism among our population. So I think it's good too that people know that too is a universal conversation. And the other thing is, when this movie came out, I think it was originally supposed to come out in 2020, and then it was
Mhm.
delayed a year because of the pandemic. So I don't believe they reached the huge audience that they wanted. But it's just so important that this film, that it was made, that it exists, that people now, like in Ridgefield and anywhere, can watch this movie. Because I'll tell you, I grew up in Southern California in a Mexican American neighborhood in East LA. And I think by the time I was 30, maybe around 30, I could think of 3 movies I saw where I felt like I saw people like me. One was the movie back in the 80s, La Bamba, about Richie
Yes,
Valens.
yes, yes.
The Selena movie in 97, and this other movie called Stand and Deliver about
Oh, I know it well. I remember. Yes.
high school students and their teacher. And you think about it, that's really a small amount of representation. And 2 out of those 3 movies were about celebrities. So just having this showcase of a neighborhood that is sort of a stand-in for the 20% of the country that are of Hispanic background, that alone, it's tremendous. So for people like me to see, people that look like my family and my friends and my community back home up on the big screen, I mean, it's profound. And I imagine for young people, for children, just to see their stories and see people like them is very meaningful and impactful.
I appreciate your honesty because that just makes me feel proud. I have looked at many films that really do depict African Americans in a harsh manner. And so identifying with some of the characters from this movie really makes me feel that there's hope out there. And I'm wondering if you think, and neither of you are filmmakers or Hollywood types, but you are educators too. And I'm going to go into that in 1 second, because I think that it's a great lesson that we teach our students. But also, do you think that it has a way of shaping a better formation, if you will, of how pictures should be made, inviting our ethnicities, inviting our cultural experiences?
Sure. I mean, Washington Heights was not a famous neighborhood before In the Heights. People knew about it, but when I told people I was writing a book about it, they said, "Oh, Rob, this is not going to go anywhere, man. It's not a famous neighborhood. Nobody cares that you lived there when you were 1 year
People
old."
came out of Washington Heights.
Yes, they did. And it's important for that. But I think the Dominican arrival in Washington Heights has helped put the neighborhood on the map. Dominicans are the largest single immigrant group in New York City. They are the majority in Washington Heights. And that, I think, is going to help make the neighborhood more famous in the future. And In the Heights helpfully shapes that.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, and people can look at this. Of course, this is a fun movie.
Right.
It was at the time a summer movie, a musical. So it's very lighthearted on one sense. But when we look at the broader culture, right? Movies like this are so important because what was this movie about? It wasn't really about Latinos. It wasn't even really about Washington Heights. It was just a movie about people with dreams. And that's all of us.
That's universal, for sure.
And I think by the end of this decade in public schools, the population of Latino students is going to be almost 30%. So that generation, they need to be able to look around in the culture and see themselves in affirming ways and in positive ways. And I know he's an extraordinary person, Lin-Manuel Miranda. He is an extraordinary person. But just look what he himself, by focusing on his neighborhood, what he did, he brought that neighborhood to the attention of Broadway, where it won this show, the original musical, it won Best Musical. And then it became this big movie. And because he had this success within the Heights, that paved the way for Hamilton. That's the most successful musical in the world.
Absolutely.
So it shows how one person with a dream, just like in the movie, can open the door to incredible opportunities, not just for themselves, but for the whole world. And Lin-Manuel has done that.
He's done that. By the way, I read that you are familiar with members of his family. Is that accurate?
Yeah. They're beautiful. They are a beautiful family. Yeah. And actually, they still live up in Washington Heights. His father, Lin-Manuel's father, is a very well-known Democratic political consultant who's been involved with administrations on both sides going back several decades. And because of the success they've had from In the Heights and Hamilton and Lin-Manuel's Disney movies, they have a foundation where they give back to the community. And they were also super active in contributing to relief efforts. They brought Hamilton actually to Puerto Rico in 2017 after Hurricane Maria. So this type of fame and fortune landed on them in a way that they did not expect. And they have really been tremendous supporters of the Latino community. I mean, people, even now you go up there, everyone knows them or knows someone who knows them. And they've just done so much to help the neighborhood improve and to help the Latino community in general. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Rob, when's the last time you were in the Heights, and, and what does it look like right now? I mean, obviously there's major gentrification that's taken place, but tell me what your spirit is, what is developing there. And I want to also ask the question about the flags. Was that a big deal in the midst of your research, where we saw various displays of the flags coming from the different edifices? Is that part of the cultural experience as well that we saw in the film?
I mean, there's the look of the neighborhood is changing. There are a lot more apartments going in, particularly in the northern part of Upper Manhattan in Inwood, which is just north of Washington Heights. There are new buildings going in all the time. A lot of the cross streets look quite familiar. They haven't changed very much, but at big intersections, yeah, the skyline is changing. New people are going to be moving into the neighborhood. There is going to be a change. I mean, there's no question about that. When you say the flag, do you mean the Dominican flag?
I remember just seeing flags in the film itself. There were flags that were displayed from the windows, from the buildings.
Yeah,
that's something that is standard, or
you would see that, to be sure. I mean, for a lot of Dominican people who live in Manhattan, I mean, Washington Heights can feel like an outpost of the Dominican Republic, right? I mean, a friend of mine who works up there says it's for Dominicans, it's like a Dominican Disneyland. Anything you want that's Dominican, you can still find in Washington Heights. And that's still true, right? That hasn't changed. And Dominicans will be a long presence there, but it would be a mistake to deny that there's an unease about the future. What's it going to mean? Is the neighborhood going to get more and more affluent? Will there be like two mountains of affluence and a valley of low income people in between? That's something people are really concerned about, above all with the cost of housing. And there's no single issue that troubles people more.
Well, we've seen that even, I mean, for people who may not know what New York is like, but we've seen that happen even in Harlem. And so, people who are being moved out, and then other individuals come in, and then the whole gentrification process really does look so much different from what the original, quote unquote, I'll air quotes, neighborhood really did administer. And so I'm just wondering, how are people perceiving those changes? How are people understanding or trying to zero in on, is this the new frontier?
Well, it depends on who you talk to, right? If you talk to people who are moving into the neighborhood, it's the last neighborhood where you can find an affordable place in Manhattan, right? And
for
that's
now.
part of the attraction for now. and that's the attraction. But if you talk to old timers, not just Latinx peoples, but people of European descent and older immigrant families, they're worried too about the housing costs. It's a constant concern. Every time I've done a talk up in the neighborhood, it comes around to affordable housing, no matter what the starting point of the discussion.
You know what? Something I that was a takeaway for me. As we're talking about assimilation and gentrification, that's all true, and that was, if you recall, that was something they talked about in the film, in the Heights. They're worrying even back then when the movie was made that, hey, this place is changing, but we know that, as Rob mentioned, that's part of the history of Washington Heights. That we see waves of immigrants, different people from different communities or countries arriving and departing, maybe for the suburbs. But you know what? I hope people watching remember this. For me, I was up there a few times this summer. Washington Heights, it's in Manhattan, it's Upper Manhattan, it's an urban environment. But you know what? It is one of the most welcoming, open, beautiful neighborhoods in New York. And whenever I go there, like 99% of the time, I end up going to some like hole-in-the-wall restaurant or little store.
The best kind.
It's a nice vibe. And I don't mean just for Latinos. I mean for everyone. Maybe that's one reason, aside from the affordable, relatively affordable housing, is that it's a very welcoming community to all people. And I like to tell people that you can go to Washington Heights. Now I notice, I notice more newer buildings or co-ops, and more like there's Rite Aid and doctor's offices, things like that. But you can still go up there and find those stores that sell these religious candles. If you want to throw a spell on someone to make them fall in love with you, you can still get those. So, and also on the sidewalks of Washington Heights, it's like the world's largest ongoing flea market, because people sell food from
Right.
their home country to just to make ends meet. People are running a little business. People sell all kinds of lottery tickets, including from the Dominican Republic. So it's so vibrant, you know, with the struggle and with the change, just like in the movie. There's a vibrant community. I encourage people to visit. It's fun. It's, you know, and the movie showed that
Yeah.
it's not like a place to be feared or this terrible neighborhood. It is
Yeah.
truly, in reality, it is a
Right.
very joyous,
Right.
lively
But
community.
I'm so glad there wasn't that concentration of what we sometimes do know as the reality. I mean, we know that there's crime everywhere. I was just so delighted that there were aspects of this film that really did show the flavor of Washington Heights, because, you know, I'm going to say Washington Heights is a good time.
Right.
You know, it really is.
It's
When
fun.
you go up there, man, it's a good time.
It's very musical.
Right? You know, and I just love that spirit and that joy, and I think people go there because they want to have a feeling of just joy, you know, because I think that's what it really delivers, you know. So was there one character in this movie that either of you would look toward as standing out for one reason or another? And I'm going to tell you that for me, I thought it was Nina. I mean, first generation college, and that was me. That was my family. You know, in my culture, we had to go to college. Rob, yes, I was at Rutgers. And so, you know, but there was no talk about doing it in 5 years, doing it, you know, outside of what your realm was. And the fact that Nina had to come back to explain in a very solemn way that, you know, it wasn't all that it's cracked up to be, that she had disappointed her family. But, you know, so for me, I looked at that and I said, you know, that could kind of describe myself too. You know, I went through some areas of some, you know, malaise while going to school, but I'm just wondering if there was anything that captured your attention in terms of one of the characters that kind of stood out for a specific reason.
You know, the abuela really meant a lot to me because she's a kind of anchor and she's an inspiration.
Okay.
And she was a person you sensed from the film who in her own life had very modest achievements economically. Her biggest stroke is to get lucky, right, with the lottery.
Yes.
And yet through her perseverance, through her patience and faith and her generosity, she ignites good things for all sorts of other people. And I think that was a very moving aspect of the film for me.
Thank
Yeah, for me, the abuela Claudia, I believe, was also such a powerful character, because she reminded me of like the aunts in my older relatives, and maybe to some people you see on papers, Rob mentioned, like, well, maybe they didn't have you know, these tremendous achievements, but their legacy was tremendous because they changed the lives. You know, they paved the way for the younger generation, people like me. They taught us so much. They sacrificed a lot for you know, like for me and my younger nephews and nieces and cousins. So that character had a lot of resonance for me. But also so did Nina, the college student, because that was that captured part of my experience too, because I went away from home to go to school. And when you do that in Latino culture, or I think in many cultures, that's considered like, that's okay, great, you've achieved this.
Right,
but
you've arrived.
you don't always see like the nuances there, that it can be a struggle to adjust or to figure things out on your own when you're maybe the first. So yeah, so I thought those were very moving. And what I appreciated in the movie as well is that, remember, they had a story involving a young man who had DACA, who was undocumented. And so I like that. Just
I wish they could have expanded that more.
Yeah, but I actually like that it was in the movie, but it wasn't about immigration. I mean, this is a community, and he happened to be undocumented.
Right.
Because we have there are many TV movies or stories about immigrants in crisis and their migration struggles, and people being, you know, the focus, you know, in politics, so-called what some people refer to as illegal. So I appreciated that this was a part of the life of the community, but the movie didn't just focus on this. It focused on the elders. It focused on the college students, the strivers. It
Yeah.
focused on everyone.
Everyday people.
Yeah.
Right.
One of the things I loved about the film is that so many of these characters are Latinx peoples, right? But they are also real New Yorkers.
They're
You
real
could
New
not question
Right.
that about
That's
them
true.
at all. I know a Chilean guy who made a film about Washington Heights because he thinks it's the last real neighborhood in New York City where grandmothers sit out in front of buildings on
Mhm.
lawn chairs, where kids turn on the fire hydrant to cool off on a summer day, where kids play stickball in the street.
Right. Where
I
you
mean,
get the icy on the
still
street
there,
too.
right? That's still there. And I think that's
Right.
very New York.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. This is such a delightful conversation. I wanted to ask one other question, though, because there was a section, obviously, where we paid homage, if you will, to Rita and Frida. And I thought that was so important. I just want to get your take on that, because to me, that is history that should never be forgotten.
Right. I thought that was great to sort of include that in the movie, and maybe not everyone even notices it, but for a lot of people, it will spark curiosity. Like, oh, who was that? And
Right.
then they go back and find out more about the ancestors,
Yes.
the trailblazers. And can I just say that one of the most remarkable things to me about this movie, about predominantly Puerto Rican and Dominican
Mhm.
people way up in Washington Heights. When you look at the movie as a whole, with these these Busby Berkeley style production numbers and the hip hop and the rap and all the young people on social media, in that sense, this movie is so American. It's almost like an American movie, the kind of movies that used to be made in the U.S. I think back in the 40s and 50s, a big, in that sense, like an old-fashioned musical.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate how they were able to pull things from the last century to the 21st century, from Latin American culture, and also right here, from New York City and
Yes.
Washington Heights,
Yes,
just the culture we have
exactly.
here.
I think Washington Heights is going to be on the map for years to come.
Yeah.
Right?
Represent.
That's right. I am so delighted that the two of you were able to join us on this edition, because this was so refreshing for me to speak with you and to learn a lot more about the culture. This is really a great film for us to be able to introduce to our audience, especially for National Hispanic Heritage Month. So I so am delighted that the two of you were able to be with us today and to share all these reminiscences with our audience, and just really giving us some classic good information about the movie and its history and its nuances. Just really, like I said, to me, Washington Heights really is a good time. And In the Heights was equally good, I'll tell you. I loved it, and I'm so proud that the two of you came to speak with us for our diversity series. Thank you so very much, Rob.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
So
Good to talk
enjoyed
with you
you.
both.
Thank you so very much. We also want to be able to thank the Aquarian Water Company for sponsoring this Beyond the Story feature. Everyone have a wonderful day and continued success with you. And long live Washington Heights. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.